right, we're on YouTube and starting the webinar.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to class. We got another Real Spirit Journey for you tonight. My name is Alberto Carbo with the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism. And if you've ever tuned into a Real Spirit Journey class, then you know that usually it's Jon Baklund and Matthew Wood. There's always special guests and lots of interesting conversation happening on Real Spirit Journey, or RSJ as we call it colloquially here. But it's all revolving around spirituality and of course, all of the different things that can help you on your personal journey to connect with your spirituality. Tonight, we have a very special show. We have Jon Baklund and Tara Baklund. And for those of you that don't know, they are I want to say the right hand people of Matthew Wood, but they're all a great team. That they are the trifecta that birthed the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism, and all of their expertise came together to create the institute that we all know and love, and where so many people come to learn about herbalism and about so many of the topics that Matthew is so well versed on, and of course where Real Spirit Journey is hosted. So Jon and Tara have been married for 24 years. And so not only are they incredible business owners, and they are, they work together, they are married, and I think they have a lot to say and a lot for us to learn about. So welcome to another Real Spirit Journey class. My name is Alberto. For those of you that are just walking in now or who are just tuning in live, tonight's class is called Spiritual Relationships. And tonight's class is part number 1. There is going to be a part 2. Part 1 is all about interpersonal relationships and more broadly speaking about relationships. So the relationships that we have with, kind of everyone, and part 2 coming up next month will be personal relationships, and specifically with your significant other. So I'm excited to learn and see what they have to say about all this. Before we do, I'll bring you briefly to the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism.com, especially for those of you who are not familiar with the Institute or catching us live. This is the homepage, and it's Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism.com. And we currently have a 45-day free trial. That means that you don't have to pay anything up until day 46. And if you cancel before day 46, then you don't have to pay anything. You can try out everything. The 45-day trial applies to the monthly A to Z, the library, and the library plus A to Z, not the last option here, professional library. So you get to try all 3 of these out free of charge and see if you love what you see, because there's so much great content. And yeah, so take your time. Also, make sure you go to the Jon and Tara podcast channel on YouTube. And this is where Jon and Tara have share so many of their insights as a power couple. So yeah, make sure you go there.
Don't say that.
Well, that's my personal opinion. But yeah, make sure you go there and you hit subscribe so you can see when they come out with new great content. And I should also mention that for those of you who are curious about the what I mentioned before, how the Institute got started, you can go to the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism YouTube channel, and there is the MWH origin story episode there where Jon, Tara, and Matthew talk all about how the Institute got started, and you can get the full story there. Of course, if you're in the webinar, you have 2 ways to participate as always. You have the Q&A and you have the chat. The chat, you can let us know any personal anecdotes or things you want to share in class. Those are always welcome, and we encourage participation. Maybe let us know where you're joining from first. I'm in Ottawa, Canada. And for questions, please place those in the chat, in the Q&A, clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And lastly, I will say it's important, in the chat window that comes up, make sure that you click on the tab that says to host and panelists and switch it to everyone to ensure that everyone can see your messages. And without further delay, I'm going to hand it over to Jon and Tara for spiritual relationships, part number 1.
Thanks, Alberto.
Thank you, Alberto.
My pleasure.
Hey, Tara.
Hey, Jon, how's it going?
Good. Sorry, I'm messing around with cameras here.
I'm used to it. No worries. So, everybody, good to you all. It's different being here in that seat, co-teaching, co-presenting, but very familiar with you, Jon, because we, of course, do our podcast and talk about relationship stuff all the time.
All the time. Yeah, I didn't know Alberto was going to show our YouTube page. We hit 100 subscribers today.
Yay!
We have over 100 videos and we only have 100 subscribers.
Well,
That's hilarious.
we've been pretty busy doing other stuff, so we've recently gotten very consistent with it, and consistency is key, for sure.
Yeah, I suppose you got to promote it too.
Yeah, there's that. So Matt wanted a little bit of break from RSJ, which he loves doing, but we all need a break every once in a while. And so I thought, okay, well, Jon and I can take the helm for a couple of months. And I thought, what better topic to talk about than spiritual relationships? I don't think that has been covered specifically in Real Spirit Journey yet. And that kind of tends to be our specialty on our podcast and generally, when we're just having our casual morning coffee. So I thought it'd be fun to discuss and jump right into.
You're going to reveal all our secrets, huh?
Well, I don't think we can reveal all of them in classes, but like when we were chatting before we got started here, Alberto was saying, relationships are key. It's everything in a way. After you get food taken care of, your shelter, relationships affect so much in our lives. And since it's Real Spirit Journey, what about spiritual relationships? So I remember when we first met eons ago, we got together 24 years ago, and the first book I picked up at your place was called Soul Signs. And I'd never gotten into astrology other than, seeing horoscopes in the newspaper or magazine. And it was really interesting because it was of course about soul, your sun sign, but like in a soul perspective. That'd be fun. I have it somewhere on our bookshelf behind you, I bet. And
Yep.
it was what a great book to start as we were getting to know each other also, because it was, a lot of times I think you pick up that type of content when you're seeking your significant other. You're like, oh, what's a good match for me? But to pick it up, I actually read it while you were gone on a month-long training, and I was at your place, at your apartment, and I was at your school taking care of your cat. And so I could kind of like feel the environment while imagining you, and we were talking every night. Okay, this is not the next episode is actually about significant other relationships, but just to start
Yeah,
out,
you launched right into it.
well, but it was called Soul Signs.
I
And
put the link in the chat.
so maybe let's start out here. How do you feel a soul connection? What's this soul connection to you versus just kind of an everyday connection? Transactional connection, maybe.
Well, since we're talking about other, not your spouse, not your primary relationship, it can be a little bit. I thought about it a little bit after you brought it up. It can be a little bit deceptive. It's a very deep connection and almost an automatic knowing of the other person as soon as you meet them, and you realize you don't know anything about them, but you feel very comfortable. You feel a knowing, and it's hard to describe. I had it with my grandpa on my mom's side, and then I had it with my grandma on my mom's side. So strong connection through that side of the family, but that side kind of came down on the psychic side of things.
Was
And
it
so
grandma
maybe that
or great grandma on your mom's side?
great grandma, my grandpa and my great grandma, yeah. Um, and and I never actually met my great grandma on that side.
Oh,
So um, it was a yeah. Frank says it's a hypersensitive familiarization. That's a really good way to say it. Um, so I got my great grandma was a Christian Scientist, and so she was on the Christian Science side of things, not Scientology, but they really strove to understand the things in the Bible, like the miracles and different things like that. And she was a psychic, well known in the community. The police would stop over her place and ask where somebody is, and she wouldn't even turn around. She'd be at the sink, she'd be at the counter cooking, making stuff because she also ran a boarding house during the Depression. And so people just stop in and say, "Hey, do you know where this person is?" Or the police would stick their head in the door and say, "Do you know where this person is?" And she wouldn't even turn around. She'd say, "Oh, they're up at the, up at the whatever, the family drugstore or whatever it was, and she was always right. And so yeah, that connection was really strong, and through her son, my grandpa, um, and I've had since my grandpa passed, there's been connections there too. Um, so yeah, the hypersensitive familiarization, it can also feel strange. So a lot of people, if you're not mature in your emotional state, you can feel strangely attracted to the person. Um, and I think a lot of people deal with that because there's not a lot of spiritual training. There's not a lot of um, categorical conversation about this type of thing, which is partially why we're doing it. Um, and so people can have those, familiarization or familial uh, familiarization. Um, and so I think if there was more spiritual training, which used to come from religion, I think it would be a lot more clear to people. And the mystic side of religion, right? Not the standard, what I would call the um, your societal religions that are very straight and strict in those senses. So yeah, that's a little description there. What do you think? Where are you at? Hey, Ralph.
Ralph, yeah, Ralph just joined us. I agree. I think, Frank, that is a nice description, hypersensitive familiarization. And, familiar, breaking down that word. I love breaking down words because I think it really helps to reveal or bring clarity. Familiar as in familial, right? Family-like. And people that you're in the same family with, you are very acquainted with, right? You tend to know a lot about them, whether you realize it or not. And I agree, a soul connection is something that it feels there's something, a knowing, right? You know that person. And I was just going to ask you, I tend to get in the interviewer seat, so I'm going to try to be more participant. Um, and I,
Are Tara or John?
yeah, that's what I was just going to ask. Audio settings, I'll check.
Yours is a little bit quiet, Tara.
All right, well, I just turned off my automatically adjusted audio.
Okay,
Turn up my
that's
in.
better.
It's better? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thanks. And so I think that there is a familiarness, in that soul connection. And it's like things or sense things without knowing why. And I was going to ask you, but like I said, I'm going to try to get out of the interviewer seat, which I tend to be more. And rather, I'll say what I think is, there can be when you feel an attraction to someone, and it doesn't have to be like a opposite sex kind of or just physical attraction. It could just there. well, no, that is what I'm talking about. Even if you're physically attracted, there is a difference, right?
Mm,
And that um, I think that's very physical, it's very visceral, even if it's energetic, it's more like on the in the aura in a way, in the overall aura. Whereas a soul connection, my sense is that it comes from the heart. It kind of is in this region and it's like deeper.
mm,
It's a deeper like channel in a way. And it's like in a way that you're almost, I think like that's why they say you're falling in love, right? Like
mm.
your souls are is it's a falling feeling, and you can connect with someone on a soul level, and you're not falling in love, but I think it's a similar feeling. Like there's a certain kind of falling. Does that make sense?
Kind of. Frank is going to participate this time. He
That's
says,
great.
for the science minded, it's like two vibes sinking into one. The thrum goes from chaotic to smooth, and the cumulative effect is exponentially more effective. Those sound like helicopter terms, Frank.
Sounds like coherence.
Yeah,
So,
I are what I are, he says.
so this part one is specifically more about like our other relationships, all kinds of
Mm,
relationships around us. So the one let's just, you mentioned your grandpa and your great grandma who you never met and having a
mm,
connection with them. Let's start with something fun, because while you were saying that, another one that came to mind um was and this doesn't even just have to be people, was is pets, animals that you meet, and you seem to have like a soul connection, like they were meant to be. So how about we start with a pet story? Because that's just like what's coming to mind. And I have a whole list. Don't worry if you're like, I don't like
oh no.
pets. Heck, why are we talking about animals? Um, but we have an amazing story of uh, your kitty, Majesty Sapphire, and you had a cat that had recently passed of a strange blood disease, and you're like, no, that's it. I'm done, or at least done for a while. And of course, me being your wife, I'm like, no, I think you're not done. And you are a cat man, and you need a cat. And so I was on Pet Finder, and granted, this was, I mean, she's like 19 years old now, so this was 18 years ago. So early days of the internet and finding pets on the internet. And so I was on Pet Finder, and I had scheduled for someone to drop by to visit a kitten. I don't, it was strange even at the time, like they would bring a kitten to visit you. Well, anyways, they never showed up. And fortunately, I had a backup appointment, and this spunky kitty, I could just tell by her photo. And so we went to Minneapolis, which we were in the suburbs at the time. And we went to Minneapolis to kind of one of those classic apartment buildings. I think they have like 8 apartments, like four on the
Mm,
bottom, four up, and then the central stairway. And up in the back left corner, from what I remember, and this lady who had just graduated law school was fostering a bunch of pets and like literally was moving back to Wisconsin the next week. So here we arrive. John, would you like to tell the story? Because it's like, imagine like a pets movie, like a Pixar movie with pets. Pixar, would Pixar be the right one? Anyways,
sure.
and a modern animated movie. And here we come in the door, and it was like the pets are saying to each other, "It's Maggie's time. Let's all let her be, and we'll go to the other room." And all the other dogs and the cats, they left.
Oh, I can't believe people are staying through this.
Then what happened, John?
Go ahead, Terry. You tell the story. You're doing very well.
Oh, thank you. So here's a spunky kitty. So she's less than a year old, I imagine, at that point, because she's just a scrawny little thing. She's
Mhm.
a tortie, so like a charcoal and butterscotch and chocolate pudding, okay, mix. And she's a long hair, and she has a stripe down her nose. And when I saw this on Pet Finder, I'm like, that's John's cat. she has a racing stripe. Like they are meant to be. And so, like I said, all the other animals departed like on cue, and then here she just comes up and John starts playing with her, and it was an ottoman. I remember you're kind of playing over an ottoman, over the edge of an ottoman, and she's all playful and having fun, and after a while of that, you decide, okay, I guess you decided you were ready for another kitty, and I went down to the car to get the cat carrier and came back and was writing out the check, and we were just chatting and playing, and here she goes. Her name wasn't Maggie at the time, but you did you even say we're gonna go home?
No,
Hey,
you set the cat carrier down and opened it up, and she walked over and got in it and turned around and sat down with her paws near the door
mhm.
and just looked at us. And the gal, she says, "Oh, by the way, that cat's never been to the vet because I've never been able to get it into a cat carrier, into a kennel cab." And she was standing there with her mouth wide open, just like, I can't even. I have no words. This is your cat. She started freaking out. She's like, "This is absolutely your cat. I
Mhm.
fought with that cat and fought with that cat, and I can't get it into one of those." And she just walked in, and then we weren't leaving then. So I just said, I did the play thing or whatever, and said, "Come on over," and she came out, and then when we were ready to go, I opened the door on it and I said, "All right, let's go home." And she walks in and did the same thing, and the gal was just throwing her arms up, and she's like, "I can't even understand this." And she even looked at all the animals when we came into the room. There was a couple of dogs. There was what, two, three, maybe cats. There was multiple animals in the room. Probably a ferret and a gerbil and a hamster. And this lady had so many animals in her house. Literally, Maggie sat down and looked at us, and every other animal walked out of the room. And she was like, "I don't know what's going on here." So yeah, there was obviously a you know uh, either the animals were desperate to get rid of Maggie, and she really wanted to leave there too, or there was a deep connection, and there always has been. And then your little kitty, who's actually sleeping right here with me right now on the chair there, we got her a year ago. She just turned a year in the last week here, and she was the runt of the litter. There were 6 kittens in a cage at the vet. We were bringing Maggie to the vet, and this little one just sat quietly and just stared at you and watched you move back and forth because we ran into one of your cousins. Was it your
Uh,
cousin or a
happened to be my
former?
aunt and former
Uh,
teacher.
yeah. So you were talking with her, and you were all animated, and you were moving back and forth and talking to her, and she was holding a kitten, and you're just talking, and you know we have a rule, there's no playing with animals unless we're going to get one, because it's hard to not get them. But she just watched you and watched you and watched you, and I said, well, I pulled her out of the cage and handed her to you, and you were like, what are you doing? And I said, well, she's been watching you the entire time we came in here. All the other kittens are jumping on each other, running around, playing, and she's just sitting still watching you. And I said, I think we found your kitty. And your cat, Starry, had just died roughly a year ago. So,
Yeah,
and so we,
yeah, 6 months before that. And that was
yeah,
another thing. Each one of our animals, even Starry, was one of those, like I picked her out of a cage at the Humane Society and she hugged me. And I'm like, okay, you're the one.
hmm,
So,
yeah.
yeah, really special stories. And I bet a number of you have some of those too. And if you have one, I think we could take people sharing stories as well, because I think it's through these connections that we're actually connecting, right? If someone has a special story.
Well, Alberto asked, do the animals choose you, or how do you think that specific animal comes into your life? I think, well, it's complete speculation, but um, the animals might be connected to you from a past life. They might be a piece of your own soul. We know that people become fragmented for many reasons throughout lives, and they could be that connection or that reconnecting of that piece, because they sometimes they really just fit, and hopefully everybody has that kind of experience. Um,
Well, it's interesting because a few months before we got Joya, who's next to you, I actually went to the Humane Society and it was just kind of feeling longing, and just wanted to be around kitties and stuff. But there wasn't a connection, like it was to me, it wasn't about just getting a pet, or an animal. It was about there had to be that connection. And it definitely happened. I mean, I think there is a difference, and I think it's almost like, we're going to get into one-on-one relationship, your significant relationship the next time, but I think you both have to be ready, and I mean, I don't know how much an animal, I haven't had a chat like that with one of my animals yet, but were you really ready for me? I was ready for you. But certainly I think that is for humans too. So, yeah. Do you want to go much further than that? I mean, or do you want
well,
further?
I guess probably okay. So I had a cat, and a while back when I first met you, that was my white cat Alex, and that was Alexis Queen Sheba. I tend to name my cats kind of fancy names. So this is what happens when you bring your wife on the program. um, so I was going through a long. I was it was initially in my remote viewing training in 1996, and I had my white cat, and I was remote viewing constantly, and there was a lot of things happening in my house. There was um, I'm not going to say exactly who, but there was people showing up in my house in spirit form, and there was entities showing up, and there was just lots of stuff going on, and my cat was very aware of it. And my my cat would sit at the end of my bed and watch the door all night long like a protector. And sometimes she would pop up and she would just growl. The first time I heard this low guttural growl come out of her, it scared me because I didn't know what it was. And then I realized it was her. And then she would chase. It happened a couple times. She would chase something down the hallway and down into the basement. Needless to say, I didn't follow her. There was too many things happening. Um, so yes, I believe there's a long history of cats in history. And in the spiritual realm, the Egyptians revered cats. It's just I don't actually know much about it, but it's a thing.
Well, she no doubt was your protector. She was the cat that you had when we met, and she
Mm,
did not like anyone except for you. Like she looked like a statue, and she looked like a cat you could pet, and you could get one, maybe two approaches, not even pets, in, and then she would just come after you, and she didn't even have claws, and but she was so vicious. I mean, it just was scary, just getting
mm.
whacked by a mitt. And it was while you were gone that, well, even before that, but we bonded, and I felt
She
like approved.
she
Like I,
took to you, yeah.
yeah, like I had to get her approval.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, she was that way to everybody, and I would pick her up every time I came home. I'd pick her up, I'd flip her upside down and hold her like a baby and scratch her chin and everything. And she waited at the door for that. And if I didn't pick her up, she'd meow. And and yeah, she took to you. And remember the first time she laid on your chest when you were reading a book?
I
She
don't
came up
remember.
under the
I don't remember
she
the
came,
first time, but I remember doing it, and it was really special.
it blew me away. She came up under the book and laid on your chest, and she was always nice to you. And yeah, so my cat approved you,
Yeah. It was totally like that.
and that's how you find your spouse.
There you go.
You know,
Okay.
uh, stepping off of getting away from animals a little bit. I think a soul connection can happen in short periods of time very quickly. You know, I had a pretty hard upbringing in a neighborhood that was a middle class neighborhood, but it was in the 70s, and when the divorce craze started in America, and everybody was getting divorced. Our whole neighborhood, except for two families, got divorced, and there was right around 60 to 70 homes in the neighborhood. And so the neighborhood went from a suburban middle class utopia to chaos. You know, there was so many kids. Everybody had kids, at least two or three kids in each house. And I was 8 or 9 years old, and my brother would have been 4, and the whole neighborhood was full of kids. And I was getting very maliciously abused. You know, my parents didn't get a divorce. My parents were happily married, and they didn't realize what was going on at the time. And so they'd walk around the neighborhood talking, holding hands, whatever they were doing, probably gave each other pecks on the cheek or whatever, and laughing and stuff. And the kids took it out on me big time. And my parents had to call the police many times over 3 4 years. And back then you couldn't do anything. And they just go, well, it's kids. And a neighbor, our neighbor guy, his brother was in town for a few days, and we met him. And he's like, hey, this is my brother Hal. And nothing, no big deal. It's like, hey, Hal. And within a couple of days, Hal noticed what was going on in the neighborhood, and he called me over, and he says, hey, Johnny, come over here. And I went over there, and he brought me in the garage, and he had a heavy bag hanging up. And he, for a couple of hours that day, he taught me how to fight. And, cause I couldn't fight. I could, because it was 4 or 5 kids at once. And so, my dad would say punch him. My mom would say no. So I was confused at that young age. And, but Hal taught me I hit the heavy bag and learn to move and start to, have a little bit of footwork and stuff. And that made all the difference in the world. Even though I still kept getting beat up, I would get a few licks in, I'd get a few shots in, and I'd bob and weave a few shots. I'd move out of the way, and then I'd get tackled to the ground and beat up. And that was just a major connection. I've always tried to be that kind of person to other people. Somebody that just, hey, I'm here. Utilize me the way you need to. Whatever I can fill in, whatever gap I can fill in, however I can add to you and help you move on to whatever level you need to go to. That's what I try to do, because that I've never felt suicidal. However, that probably helped me not get to that point, because the abuse was horrendous. And eventually we moved out of that neighborhood. My parents didn't know what else to do. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I can
So I,
attest to being that kind of person our whole marriage, the type that would be the Hal type, right? Lending a hand.
yeah, you never know. I mean, you think you need to spend a lot of time with people to make a difference, but you don't know what one gesture, one smile, a couple hours learning how to hit and slip and move, that's a pretty big deal. My parents wouldn't let me go to martial arts, because back in those days, the religions were very attached to the martial arts systems. And, I grew up Lutheran, so Lutherans were afraid of everything. And so I didn't get into martial arts until officially until I was 17. And so, yeah, got quite a history in martial arts. But yeah, I think there's many ways to be connected or feel a connection and follow it, and to not make too much of it. You might be called to be there for 10 minutes. You might be called, like I said, just to smile at someone, and move on, you know. And so I think when, like I noticed our new kitten Joya looking at you, I couldn't ignore it, because she was so intent on you. And even I'd walk by and I'd move, she didn't even look away from you. So now she's kind of become a daddy's girl too here, but
Yeah, totally.
kitty dada's girl.
One thing I thought would be interesting to bring up is I sense sometimes I've heard people say that they have a hard time making that kind of connection, like a
Mm.
soul, kind of a deep connection. And I find it rather easy. And we've kind of joked. So, like Alberto said in the beginning here, you and Matthew are, the three founders of the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism. And it's grown, obviously, over time. And at this point in time, I lead a team of I mean, you basically are the CEO. Matt is like the director of all the education part. I'm the operating director or president. And then we have three wonderful contractors, including Alberto, who work with us. And my joke is sometimes, not all the time. I mean, it's kind of more just a way to accept myself. I'll say that I'm like the mom boss. And in the way that like I'm apprehensive about being too bossy, although I am very linear. But I tend to be oversensitive, and so like um, that so saying mom boss is kind of my own way of just like accepting myself and just going, okay, that's the way I am. Sometimes I have to push myself to be a little bit more, driving or whatever may be the case. But that being the case, we've followed this clinical psychologist who's become very popular since um, Jordan Peterson, and he often quotes the big five traits. And these are well studied. These are personality traits that people have, and some of them are gender related. And so women in general tend to be more neurotic, which just means that they're just tend to be more concerned about things. That's not the clinical explanation. And I wonder if the more because the opposite would be like being disagreeable. I don't think that's technically the opposite, but because disagreeableness and disagreeableness is actually a different characteristic trait, but I think they tend to be on opposite ends. Because neurotic would be the opposite of what I don't know what the opposite is at this moment. They're on a scale. But in any case, if you tend to be very neurotic, you tend to like be very empathic, I think is a correlation. And I think it can be related to also either being energetically and perhaps therefore being able to connect on a soul level. Because, energy and soul
I,
are,
I'd put it this way, because women are neurotic, and it sounds like a bad word, but it's more detail oriented. It's paying attention to multiple things, worrying a little bit more. Um, they also are more intuitive in general, and intuition is, the psychic and intuitive is interchanged a lot. And I learned from Matthew the definition of intuitive, is all of your senses, all of your faculties, physical faculties, coming together and forming the assumptions of what is going on, what's happening, what needs to happen, And I think that's a character trait of that, of part of it is that neuroticism of paying attention to so many things all the time. Um, and then being maybe more in tune with your body, because women have physical changes every month, and so you are feeling things more. And so I think it's a powerful character trait, and it's a powerful trait. And I think there are men that have it too, but I think on the male side of things, there's a little less intuition and a little bit more psychic nature, and it's mostly ignored on the male side because it's considered that woo woo and all that stuff that and guys will get teased about it if they say anything. And I mean, let's face it, guys get teased about everything no matter what they say. And we like that. But the connection, um, I'll talk about a couple people here. Frank and I have that soul connection ever since we started chatting. Alberto and I have it, and I have it with also your other contractors, and that's how I chose them. Just for those of you that don't know, I chose Alberto and Lee and Cherish for Tara. Um, she needed some people to work with and to help her because the institute was growing so fast and getting so big. She was working 10 14 hours a day easily for several months, and then I just sat down with Tara and said, describe to me everything you do on a daily basis, and I'll find your people. And so she did. We spent about a week talking about everything that has to happen, is happening. And I chose 4 people for interview. One of them didn't show up, and Alberto and Lee and Cherish all showed up and got chosen. And that was out of hundreds of resumes. And so there is a major connection. And I think that people need to trust that. They need to, I think a lot of people run away from it because it can be familiar. It can be overwhelming. It can be too much connection, and people are very used to trying to stave off connections nowadays because you don't know. You don't know what that's going to bring. You don't know how that person's going to behave, how they're going to respond, how if you create too much of a connection too soon, people want to kind of get to know a person before they feel connected. But I think you can't know anybody unless you're connected to them. So I'm more of a jump in and figure it out. If the water's too hot, get out. But you gotta have that connection, and people, you have to start revealing things to each other in that connection. So it happened very quickly with your contractors. With me, I just chatted with them, talked. I told a couple stories about me, why I'm doing this. They told some stories. I said what we want the future to look like, and we just talked about it. And I think they got, and Alberto's here, but I think they got very comfortable very quickly because of how I approached it. And if you don't have that connection, that's when you say no. You can't work with that person. You can't be part of this group. You can't, I don't know, go to that church or be in that band or music club or orchestra, whatever it is, right? Um, Go ahead.
So you have a background in remote viewing, and you've described that, I've been through your training. It's on the Institute, the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism. You basically get a basic remote viewing training for an amazing price at this point. So if you're at all interested, your original moniker, or if not brand and business, was called Soulfire. And you described to me very early on why you were so motivated to teach remote viewing was so that people could learn to connect with their soul, and among other things. So I think that would be a terrific segue. I have a whole list of topics we have to cover yet, but I think that's a great point of discussion, because remote viewing, as you've described it, and I've experienced it too, I do believe what you've said and experienced, that you are using your soul. And it is a type of soul travel. And so, how do you think that relates to this topic of soulful relationships?